Evening. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Emily Bird, and I'm the Executive Director of the Foundation here at Wayne Community College, and we are on our next to last lecture series of the Fall 23 Arts and Humanities program. Thank you so much for your support this season, and just want to say welcome once again, and welcome to those online who are watching at home. I was given the tall task by our Arts and Humanities Director, Charlotte Brow, to introduce Geoff Hulse. And I said, Charlotte, I can't introduce Geoff Hulse. So I'm not going to try. There's really no reason. We all know and love Geoff. He is a staple in Goldsboro and Wayne County and at Wayne Community College. And we are so thankful that he is here tonight to talk with his friend, Jim Blackburn. So without further ado, I welcome Jim and Geoff.
Thanks.
Well, first, let me give you a bison welcome, Jim, to Wayne Community College.
Thank you all for coming. I'm happy to be here tonight.
So, let me just give you a little intro on how Jim and I became friends. He has been doing seminars here and all over North Carolina and beyond, having to do with professionalism and ethics and quality of life, particularly of attorneys. And I've been to a couple of the seminars, and at breaks and all, we would talk, and I shared with him some of my story, and it's not what we're here to talk about, but he was a very good person to talk to about it. We shared some of our ups and downs. So he got me to do, not only do a podcast that we'll talk about a little bit later, Grit, and also I appeared recently at one of his continuing legal education. So it's really nice to get to know this gentleman. You're going to learn a lot more about him tonight. I will say that lawyers do not, and ex-lawyers, no offense, but
That's the story of my life.
that lawyers do not like answering questions. We're better usually asking questions. For the main reason is we like being in control. That's a simplification, but I mean, I've been on the witness stand, probably not as much as I should have been if you know my past, but I have been just in mundane matters, just get on the witness stand and have a lawyer asking me questions. It's not real good, but this is an interview between friends, so we don't have that real issue. The other reason people don't like lawyers answering questions is they run on. I don't know why people assume that. How long have I been talking now? 4 minutes. Okay.
You're into my time.
Yeah, getting into his time. So, without further ado, Jim, first, just tell us a little bit about your upbringing and where you're from and all of that.
Well, it's good today to be in Goldsboro. For this reason, besides being here with all of you all, I have started a podcast called Grit, Stories of Resilience, and I was trying to figure out last week what to do for this Monday's podcast. And Thursday of last week, I was in North Wilkesboro, which, as you know, is not a large place. And I grew up in a small town. I grew up in the town of Wake Forest in North Carolina, back when it was Wake Forest College, not Wake Forest University was there. My dad was the Baptist minister on campus and the chaplain of the college. And so I was there till about 10 years old and then moved to Winston-Salem in the summer of 1956. And so my podcast today is entitled The Beauty of Small Towns. And so for that reason alone, I'm happy to be in Goldsboro here tonight. So,
Well, thank you.
yes.
So you grew up in the town of Wake Forest in Wake County.
I did. That's where I learned to ride a bike, go swimming. Back then in the 50s, you couldn't do anything on Sunday afternoon, you know. Everything was closed, but we tried to do the best we could and rode bikes. You learn to do it. My hometown are college campuses. When I go to Winston-Salem, I don't really go to Winston-Salem so much as I go to Wake Forest University campus, which is where I basically grew up on that campus. So it's a wonderful way to grow up. So those of you who have kids in Goldsboro, it's really a special thing to be able to do, I think, to be able to have to grow up in a small town. Goldsboro's not as small as Wake Forest was, but it's not, a great size place.
Okay, so you graduated high school, and where'd you go to college?
I went to Wake Forest.
Oh, okay.
And the reason I went to Wake Forest, there were a lot of reasons I went to Wake Forest, but one of the reasons, it's really hard to get into these schools today, admissions-wise. But the dean of admissions at Wake Forest at the time I applied had lived across the driveway from me since I was 5 years old. So all I had to do was put in my application. He'd call me on the phone and say, "Okay, Jim, you're in." So it was not hard. So it was not because I was qualified to go to Wake Forest. It was not. But I left Wake Forest in a misguided attempt to see the world and went to Chapel Hill to the University of North Carolina. I still remember, I know Jeff is a big Carolina fan, and so maybe many of you all, but I can still remember the morning I left Wake Forest to go to Carolina to law school. I was walking across the campus and ran into this professor, and he knew I was going to law school. And he said, "Well, when are you going to start?" And I said, "Well, I'm leaving for Chapel Hill today." He said, "You're doing what?" I said, "I'm leaving for Chapel Hill." And he said, "I'm so sorry." It was like someone had died, And but I loved Carolina and Chapel Hill. I left there, and as Nick Weaver, who is here somewhere, remembers, I joined the Attorney General's office. I hadn't seen Nick in easily 30 years or maybe more. I was 25 years old when I first met him, and there was no office space. So I was in his office for about a year. He'd always kick me to the curb and make me leave the office when he had to interview people. They were always nice young ladies for secretarial positions, and I don't know why I got kicked out, but I always got kicked out. I don't know what happened, but that's what it was.
So what did you do at the Attorney General's office?
Well, Nick's job was to drive Senator Robert Morgan around. And when Nick couldn't, I did. And that was part of my job. But I worked in state agencies, government sorts of things. I ran the Consumer Protection Division for 2 or 3 years, and then went to an office called the Special Prosecutions, which was just starting. And it was an office which was designed to advise district attorneys. I met a former district attorney here a few minutes ago about legal issues they might have with their cases, and sometimes try some of them. Basically, the cases that we tried were the ones that they didn't want to try for obvious reasons, and we generally did not do that well. That's the first time I'd ever tried a case. I went to Newton, North Carolina. I don't know if any of you all know where Newton is, but it's on the way to the mountains. It's the county seat of Catawba County, and near Hickory. So I'm there on my first jury trial, and we were charged with prosecuting a pharmacist there. And we tried the case all week long, and he was convicted of a misdemeanor and got a $100 fine and probation. My co-counsel and I drove back, to Raleigh, and this is before the internet and smartphones and such, so we could learn the value of spin. So we went back to Raleigh and told everybody we'd won. And it didn't go well. They had a visiting judge from Charlotte, and I wasn't doing very well, so the judge finally called my co-counsel to the bench and said, "Jim doesn't seem to know what he's doing." And Mike says to the judge, "Judge, he doesn't. Can you help us?" And that was my first trial.
Well, when I've told this story many times, when I started dating my wife, Lee, her dad was a huge East Carolina fan. So his first question that I heard back about us dating is it not bad enough he's a lawyer? Did he have to go to Carolina? So my question for you is it bad enough you're a lawyer? Why'd you become a prosecutor?
Well, I'd been in the Attorney General's office too long, and it was politics. And in 1976, Jimmy Carter's elected president. Robert Morgan is the senator. So he had patronage. So Robert had sort of mentored me. So he called me one day on the phone and said, would you like to be an assistant United States attorney? I said, well, yeah. How much does it pay? And he told me. I said, well, that was more than I was making now, so I'd go do it. I had no criminal law experience except that one misdemeanor case. He said, Jim, I'm going to give you an extra $500, get your U.S. attorney to give you an extra $500 a year, and they're going to make you the head of the criminal section. And you'll be the top assistant. This is with absolutely no experience whatsoever. I got a nice office, viewed the Capitol grounds and so forth, but didn't know what I was doing once I was there at first.
So that you started with the U.S. Attorney Office about when?
It was in October of 1977.
All right. So I know a lot of folks here are interested in the Jeffrey MacDonald case. At that time, you were not involved in the case.
No.
But you had you become aware of that, all that was going on?
Just
in that?
like everybody else, I remember reading the newspaper when the murders occurred in Fayetteville, and followed the military hearings, and was interested in that, and sort of lost track of it. And he was indicted in 1975, and it didn't go to trial for 4 years because it was in the appellate courts on speedy trial issues. So it went all the way to the United States Supreme Court.
That was pre your trial?
Yes, and so the U.S. attorney calls me on the phone the day before he was sworn in and says, Jim, there's a case that I want you to handle if it comes back from the United States Supreme Court. He told me what it was. He says, can you handle this? I said, sure. Yes, absolutely. And still, I had only had one misdemeanor trial my whole life. And the other side had Wade Smith, and these other great lawyers, Bernie Siegel. And my co-counsel had less experience than I had. But he was smart. And the most interesting thing is about trying cases, Brian Murtaugh was my co-counsel. He was with the Justice Department in Washington. He knew everything about the case. One of the most fascinating things about Brian was that they exhumed the bodies of the children to get hair samples. And Brian was there at the cemetery when that happened. And, standing there watching that and seeing the FBI agent jump into the ground and open them to take the hair samples just stayed with him the rest of his career. And it made him really passionate. And he worked hand in glove with me through the whole thing and worked on all the appeals until he retired. He never lost.
So many people here, of course, know the saga, I'll call it, of Jeffrey MacDonald. But for those who are here, or just to remind folks, could you just tell us about more or less the facts of that case in a few minutes?
It was a rainy morning on February the 17th, 1970. Colette MacDonald had been to like Wayne Community College in Fayetteville, whatever the Fayetteville Community School was. That night for a class, she had gone and taken a psychology course because one of her children was wetting the bed too much, and she wanted to figure out why. She comes home, takes off her Ouijans, puts her pocketbook on the table, and has about 4 or 5 hours left to live. The truth is that I don't know exactly why she was killed initially. I do know that she and her husband, Jeffrey MacDonald, got into a fight. And it's like this. If you get into an argument with somebody, you can argue and go to bed and wake up the next day and okay. But if one of you all hits or strikes the other one, then everything changes. And that's what happened. He picked up a bed slat, it's like a club, and struck her with it. Pushed her away. She had bruises on her chest. Struck her with it so hard. These are short ceilings. Her blood type, which was type A, was on the ceiling. It struck her so hard that the club splintered. There's a 13-inch piece of the club was a splinter on the floor. He broke both of her arms. He cracked her skull, but he didn't kill her. She wasn't dead. The older child, Kimberly, who was 6 and a half, woke up and walked to the edge of the doorway to the master bedroom. And as she did, she was struck with the club. Perhaps as MacDonald was coming back with the club to strike his wife. She was hit so hard that she could no longer speak. And that blow would have killed her. But she's still alive, I guess. MacDonald picks her up and carries her to her bed. And just like a father, he not only puts her on the bed, he tucks her in with the sheet, the bedspread. As he does so, he's wearing a pajama top which has been torn in the struggle, and threads from that pajama top fall into the bed underneath the covers, 8 or 10 of them. He places her so the left side of her face, which is where she was struck, is leaning against the pillow. And she's stabbed 8 to 10 times. I don't know that he stabbed her to hurt her so much as he was stabbing her to promote his argument that intruders came into the house, because multiple weapons can suggest multiple people. Colette is not dead. She gets up from the floor, believe it or not, and walks into the bedroom of the youngest child, Kristen, who's 2 and a half, and sealed Kristen's doom. MacDonald goes in, whacks her some more, gets her off the bed, puts on a bed sheet, carries her back into the master bedroom. As he does so, he leaves his footprint, leaving the room. And the footprint is in Colette's blood type, which is not on the floor. So how did it get there? It's not going into the room, it's coming out. And it got there, we argued, and the jury believed, because he stepped on her blood on the sheet while he was putting on that sheet to carry her back. And we know that she was on the sheet because the FBI is able to, just like taking your clothes that you have on, a collar on your jacket, for example, right there, or your shirt. If there's blood on there, it will transfer that blood to the sheet, And as a result of that, we can match and measure if you were there. Everybody in the house had a different blood type. He didn't know that. Jess was B, Colette's was A, Kimberly was AB, and Kristen was O. I know that sounds odd for the O, but and there was no DNA testing at that time. Colette had a hair in her hand that was unidentified, and at the trial, Bernie Siegel, the lawyer for her, claimed that was a hair that was unidentified, it belonged to one of the intruders, or no, it belonged to the killer. That's right, it did. They did DNA testing of it later on, and it was MacDonald's hair. Kristen was stabbed between 35 and 40 times.
2-year-old.
The younger girl, with an ice pick and a knife. And I've always thought one of the most awful things that hurt MacDonald in the trial was that Kristen had on her finger a scratch or cut, like a paper cut, not a real deep cut. The pathologist who testified said, that's like a defensive wound. And if you think about it for a second, a defensive wound is something where you know what's happening. She was fighting back. And I remember standing behind MacDonald when I was making my closing argument and said the last person she saw before she died was her daddy, taking her life and fighting back. The motive, I think, for this is not very sexy, but it's real. It was a fight that got out of control. The rest of it is a cover-up, is what it was. He was a doctor. Remember, this is the 1970s. It's not 2023. He was a male doctor. Nobody thought husbands would do or fathers would do this. When I worked at the Oyster Bar lots of time, 42nd Street Oyster Bar as a waiter later in my life, I always got asked, the two most often questions I got asked were, what's your fresh fish of the night? And did he do it? They wouldn't say he was. And then they would say, well, I can understand why he perhaps killed his wife, which does not speak well for wives and husbands, but I don't understand how he could kill his children. And the answer to that is, whoever killed the wife killed the kids. I mean, it's almost common sense, you know. The jury was not out a long time. It was about 4 to 5 hours, and came back and convicted him.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. In addition to him being a doctor, he was a Green Beret at that time.
He was.
And so he had portrayed himself as kind of the all-American guy throughout the pendency of this, right?
Well, he was a captain of his high school football team. He went to Princeton. He was well educated. He met Colette in high school. Her stepfather used to drive them to the movies. He shoveled the snow off their driveways in New York. I mean, you know, what's not to like? And then this happened.
So you were how old when you were assigned the case?
32.
And your experience prior to that was?
Well, when I was assigned to it, I had no experience, except that one case I told you about. By the time I tried the case, a year or two later, I tried lots of federal criminal cases by that time. And Judge Franklin Dupree, who was the Carolina graduate, was a chief district court judge, and he was the trial judge. And he is the one who taught me how to try cases. And he taught me how to try cases by ruling against me on every chance he could. And I was finally learned what I could and could not, you know, do in the courtroom, and that's how I learned to try cases.
So you got into the case. There was a little procedural history about it, right? I mean, he was back in 1970, he was investigated by the military.
He was investigated by the military in 1970. They decided that he was involved. They went to a military hearing called Article 32, which is like a preliminary hearing in civilian court, criminal court, and went on for a long time. The charges were dismissed, and they were told to investigate again this other lady who was maybe involved in the case, named Helena Stokely. And so they did, and the charges were essentially not further prosecuted. But because he had not gone to court-martial, you know, which is the trial, it was not double jeopardy. He had not ever really been tried.
So he was cleared in that hearing and I think got an honorable discharge.
He did.
And but you mentioned the possible or his portrayal of somebody coming in the house. Tell the audience a little bit about what was his contention that actually had happened to him.
Well, this was about 6 months after the Charles Manson murders in California. And you might recall in those murders, I don't remember which one it was, but the word pig was written in blood on one of the doors to one of the homes where the Sharon Tate murders took place. The word pig in Colette's blood type A is written on the headboard of their master bedroom, which, when I went there in '79, you could still see the outline of the word pig faintly in blood. He claimed, though, that hippie intruders, the word hippie is a phrase we don't hear anymore. It's a long time ago. You date yourself. It's not gray hair that will tell you that you're old. So if you use the word hippie, it'll tell you that you're old. And so, I mean, you know, and so there were 4 intruders. He claimed 4 people were there. You know, I don't know about you, but if one of you, the strongest person in this room, if you're laying tonight on a sofa in your living room, and 4 people, and you're unarmed, and 4 people come into your living room, one with a baseball bat, and one with a knife, and one with an ice pick, and they want to hurt you, they're going to kill you or hurt you really bad. MacDonald said he fought for his life there. They tore his pajama shirt. He had 18 to 20 life-threatening wounds. He was struck on the head and knocked out cold. The problem with that is he wasn't.
Been there.
He didn't have any injury to his chest that required a Band-Aid or mercurocone or methylate. He did have a puncture in his right chest, which was used like a pneumothorax. It was a punctured lung, which they fixed. And we were able to get a doctor in Southern Pines to testify that you could, he didn't say he did, but he said you could insert a needle or something into that part of your chest and survive, you know, if you got medical treatment.
And he was a surgeon.
Yes. And so, and then he became an emergency room doctor for a long time. And so, I mean, that's what we all argue happened. That's what we think caused it.
Was there not, two things before we get past it, wasn't there, oddly enough, a magazine in the apartment that talked about the Manson murders? That's one question. And the second, as I recall, the sink or the lavatory where his blood was found was in front of a mirror where I presume you argued
Yes.
he self-inflicted the wound.
Well, the magazine was Esquire. There's a picture of Lee Marvin on the front of it. Why is Lee Marvin so afraid? It was about the Manson murders. And if you look to the articles in there, we talk about witches and witchcraft and all that sort of stuff, and the intruders, which is where we think he got some of the idea from. His blood, some blood types, fingerprints were found on the magazine that indicated he had opened it. The blood on the bathroom sink is one of those old sinks, you know, not fancy sinks at all. And there's a lot of blood on there. And I asked him how the blood got there. He said, well, there's a lot of blood, Mr. Blackburn. I said, well, that's true. I said, well, let me ask you this question. If you were stabbed and hurt in the living room, how long was it before you went to the bathroom? And he said, well, I did all these. He said, it was about 10 minutes. Okay. So your blood is not found in the living room, but it's found in the sink. Yes. Do you know whose blood that is? No. I assume it's one of the children. No, it's not. It's your type blood. How come your type blood and nobody's other type blood is found on the bathroom sink underneath the mirror, outside a hallway closet where syringes and that medical things were kept? That's the kind of evidence we were able to introduce to show what we believed happened. And in other words, his statements were inconsistent with the physical evidence. If he had just kept his mouth shut and not said anything, he had diarrhea of the mouth, he loved cameras, he loved reporters, he loved seeing his photograph in magazines and the paper, and that, as much as anything, is what undid him.
Yeah, I have people ask me, he said, are you like Perry Mason where somebody stands up in the courtroom and says, I did it? I said, yeah, but it's always my client. I don't know.
That's true.
That's a problem. But so you were up against really a well-renowned criminal defense lawyer in the nation, and no slight to Wade Smith, who was also, it became one of the greatest lawyers North Carolina's ever produced. What was that like, dealing with those two attorneys? I'm sure you and Wade had a little more familiarity. You and Bernie Siegel was the attorney.
Yes. Well, they had two lawyers at their table. We had 3 or 4 at our table. And I arranged my chair so I didn't have to sit next to them. And somebody else sat next to them, you know. I was sort of removed. So I sort of ignored them as best I could. I just didn't try to pay much attention to them. And that worked well. But, you know, when you're up to your you-know-what in alligators, it's not any time to drain the swamp, as you know. So I tried not to drain the swamp. My goal in this case is very simple. I think I've told you this before. My goal is not necessarily to seek justice. It wasn't necessarily to win. I didn't want to give an honorable try. My goal was not to embarrass myself and do something stupid. I wanted to preserve my whole self, and I wanted to act straight and honorable and do the best that I could. If I did the best that I could, then I would be okay. I never will forget that the day before the trial began, Brian Murtaugh asked me if when the judge came into court the next day, could he stand up and say, the United States is ready for trial? I said, yes, you can do that. He said, good. That means if we lose, I've gotten it to the courtroom, I've got it for trial, then I can live with myself. I have never been involved in a case in which there was so much passion on both sides. On both sides. It's like the Arabs and the Israelis, or the Republicans and the Democrats. Nobody liked each other. And that's the way it was fought like that the whole time. It was always contentious.
So what was your thought process? I know you said you didn't want to embarrass yourself, but
I wanted to win.
Thank you.
Don't misunderstand. I don't want. I was maybe being falsely humble. I wanted to win because I thought he did it. I didn't want to win just because I thought he didn't do it. I was convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that he did it. I worked on this case for a year. I'd read everything in the grand jury. I'd read all the exhibits. They had a coffee table, a big coffee table in the living room. It was over on its side. I bet you I kicked that coffee table over 150 to 200 times. And every time I did, it was top heavy and would roll over all the way. Every time. I could not make it. I couldn't gently turn it over and let it land as it landed. I think it was staged to some degree, not much. I don't think he was that smart on that part. I think he was desperate to get out of it. So I think he concocted this story. Hippie intruders have done this. And that's what he told the MPs when they first got there. The first MP who got there was a guy named Richard DeVere. He lives in New York. Now, he's still alive. He lives in New York. He called me 2 or 3 years ago when Hulu did a special on the MacDonald case. He was the first one in there. And think about how you don't like to go in your house dark at night without the lights on. Think for a moment if you go into a house where you think there are killers in there, and all you've got is a flashlight. And you're walking in and you don't know if they're still there. He was terrified. He was an MP. He wasn't a criminal investigator. But they did an amazing job. Sure, they made some mistakes. They did some dumb things, but basically they did enough right, that we had a lot of physical evidence that helped us do the case. But our thoughts were we wanted to win. We didn't want to do it anyway but the right way to win, and we didn't. There's been no case that I know of that's been appealed more times on more things than the MacDonald case. It's been to the United States Supreme Court between 6 and 8 times. It is the longest running federal criminal case in the history of the United States. It ended only about 2 years ago, from 1970 or 1975 when the indictments came down.
You said Mr. Murtaugh's basically handled most of those appeals.
He and the Justice Department did. You don't want to get me anywhere near writing a brief on appeal. But he and the Justice Department had some really good appellate lawyers, and they handled it.
Well, it goes without saying, the trial was in Raleigh,
yes. The
federal courthouse, but
yes.
It was nationwide interest, correct?
Yes.
And you said Mr. MacDonald, did I read one time he didn't like being called Mr. MacDonald? He wanted to be referred to as captain or?
Captain or doctor.
Yeah.
He didn't want to be called Mr. MacDonald.
But there was a lot of interest, and then so, and I did want to say one thing. We were learning about your being young. It didn't mean that you weren't smart and that you became more experienced before this trial. But you agree you had two different type defense lawyers, and you had a pretty stern judge, but you agree that the system only works if everybody is really prepared, the court, the prosecutors, and the defense lawyers.
Yes, I would say we didn't have, some of you all are paralegals. I know one of you used to come to my seminars all the time as a paralegal. Paralegals were not in vogue then. There weren't anything, there weren't things like, they didn't have people like paralegals. We had staff and system. We had law interns from Wake Forest, Carolina, and Duke would help us, and the other side had lots of interns. So we were well researched. We had a lot of work on both sides. Judge Dupree was one of the smartest judges in the world at that time, and he was on top of things. He was on top of technology in 1979 in terms of legal research and that sort of thing. So it was a well-prepared case on both sides, I think.
And then, of course, afterwards, the big book, Fatal Vision, was kind of took the country by storm, right?
Yeah, you know, Joe McGinnis, who's passed away, wrote the book. I have to tell you all a story. I don't think I've told it very much. I didn't like the idea that Joe McGinnis was going to write a book because I thought he would make me in the South look like stupid hicks. And so one Sunday night he was over in Raleigh, and he came by and wanted to have dinner at my house. So we didn't have anything to fix, so we fixed scrambled eggs and grits. Joe had never had grits. He didn't know what grits were. And I was horrified because I was convinced, you know, that he was going to write about grits in the South. Now, that made us slow and dumb. But he didn't. Joe became one of my very good friends in life. We didn't speak. He was on the other side. We didn't speak during the trial at all. Never, didn't say hello.
He was basically part of the MacDonald, not team, but he had a constant audience with Jeffrey MacDonald.
He was there. They lived at a fraternity house at State. That's where the defense team stayed. And he was there all the time.
So I read, again, Fatal Vision. It's a lengthy book, but I got through it.
Yeah.
One of the things I've asked you about this before, and I'm not trying to embarrass you, but it seems like Jeffrey MacDonald had more psychiatric exams than about anybody you could imagine. The defense, the prosecution tried to get him. The military had him. Everybody had him, and I understand he was. I think everybody could agree, maybe even him. He was a real solid narcissist, right?
Yes.
And that kind of meant he had trouble coming to grips with anything that didn't fit his narrative. But I recall reading in the book, his lawyers were trying to prepare him for your cross-examination. And they were saying, look, Mr. Blackburn is a Southern gentleman. He's going to treat you nice. Just answer the questions. Don't get into it with him. And one of the things Jeffrey MacDonald was very sensitive about is that some of the reports indicated he had latent homosexual tendencies. And it made him mad. And his lawyers got on him about it. He said, so what, if Blackburn starts asking me about my latent homosexual tendencies, can I say, you sure have a nice ass, Mr. Blackburn? And I asked you, was that one of the highlights of your life?
Well, he actually said tight.
Oh. See, he's never thought about it.
I did read that in the book. I kept wanting Joe to take that out of the book. He wouldn't take that out of the book, but he left it in there. But
so the trial lasted how long?
Started in mid-July, and it ended up the last day of August, right before Labor Day.
And you had both sides felt like they had a pretty good jury, certain members of the jury.
Federal juries are not drawn just from Wayne County. They're drawn from Wayne County and 4 or 5 other counties. It's a multi-county area, you know. So in Wayne County, they were drawn from lots of different counties, not just Raleigh. And everyone in the jury pool, with the exception of one person, I think, had some level of college education. We had a chemist, which was really good for the blood work, you know. We had a former highway patrolman, and which was remarkable that they left him on there, but he was on there, became the foreman of the jury. But it was very attentive. They weren't sequestered. They were on time. So far as I know, there was never any misconduct of any kind or any hint of that with the jury.
There had been, Judge Dupree would have taken care of it.
He killed him. Judge Dupree was really good. I would call it, he flirted with the jury, you know. He would ask you, how was your drive in today? How's the rain doing on you? Isn't your husband a farmer? How's the rain doing? You know, how are your plants doing? That sort of thing. And of course, the jury just ate that up and loved it. And they respect anything he said or did. So it worked out well.
So I recently heard you tell the story about, and it ties in with something that I try to preach to young lawyers, that everybody in the court system is important. Not just the usual suspects, the judge and the prosecutors, but the clerks and the bailiffs and the custodians. And you had as I recall, you were getting ready to deliver this jury argument in the biggest case you could imagine, and you needed somebody to let you in next door at one of the other courtrooms so you could practice your jury argument.
Ann Goodwin was a deputy clerk, and it's amazing how people aren't nice to the clerks. It's such a silly thing to do, not to do that. And so she was my friend. So I asked her one night, I said, Ann, I've got to make this closing argument. Or there was another courtroom in the federal building just like the one we were in. It was empty. Nobody was using it. I said, can I have the key to get in there tonight? And she wasn't going to let me. And I looked really distraught. And she relented and let me in there. And I locked the door and wouldn't let anyone in. And I gave my closing argument, or what I thought was going to be my closing argument, to an empty courtroom. And I talked and talked and talked until I got emotional, started getting teary-eyed. And when I got to that point, I just stopped and didn't ever try it again. You know, I don't know. It's like practicing a play. You can overdo and over-prepare. You can under-prepare, but you can overdo it too. And so when I was there on the cusp of it, I knew it was time to stop. And so the next day we did closing arguments.
So I recall Mr. Siegel we keep referring to. He was not from North Carolina, was he?
He was from California, originally from Philadelphia, but lived in California.
And Wade Smith, I think he just recently retired.
He did.
So Bernie Siegel went so long on his argument that left Wade Smith very little time to talk, because they wanted Wade to have some kind of, folksy kind of a closing, right?
He left him 60 seconds to talk.
But Wade went to you and said, could I have a couple of your minutes? And did that happen?
No, that's not like it. It was close. I went over to Wade. I was afraid that Judge Dupree, might give him more time, and I didn't want that to happen. So I walked over to Wade. I said, and I had about 30 minutes left for rebuttal. So I said to Wade, Wade, if you will tell the jury that I did this, I want credit. I'll give you 10 minutes of my time. And he took them. He used them. And I'll be darned if he didn't do really well. I'm grateful that he didn't have the hour that he was supposed to have. He really did well. Got the jury quiet, which I didn't like. I remember he walked to the jury and he said, well, I've always been told that after 15 minutes, no souls are saved at church. So 10 minutes ought to do me just fine. And of course, everybody smiled and chuckled. And he was off to the races.
Well, I know your jury argument has been in the book and been promoted. And with your permission, I'm just going to read a part I thought was really good, having delivered some that I think some are okay, some I know my clients would agree weren't that good. This was toward the end of the jury summation. Ladies and gentlemen, if in the future after this case is over, if in your jury deliberations you should think again of this case. I ask you to think and remember Colette, Kimberly, and Kristen. They would have liked to have been here. They have been dead for almost 10 years. That is right now around 3,400 or 3,500 days and nights that you have had and I have had and the defendant has had that they haven't. They would have liked to have had that. If in the future you should cry a tear, cry one for them. If in the future you should say a prayer, say one for them. If in the future you should light a candle, light one for them. That was pretty powerful.
I was sitting on the ground in my backyard one night the week before and trying to figure out, what to say. And I thought about the days and nights that they had not had, that we have had. And as many lawyers are, I guess I'm a great plagiarizer. And I remembered when I was a kid, and only one other person in life has ever figured out where it came from. She was a reporter for the News and Observer. And she hit it spot on. And I said, and there was a movie, Bing Crosby and Debbie Reynolds. Bing Crosby, believe it or not, is a priest. The name of the movie is Say One For Me. And there's a song in there that says, the next time you do something, say one for me. And that's where the idea of those words about the candles and the prayers and tears came from. So sometimes if you're walking in the backyard by yourself at night when the lights are out, you can get creative. Any of you all in this room can do that. You really can. And you'll have some of your best thoughts, I think, that way.
So you've already said that the jury was out about 4 hours.
4 to 5 hours.
And what do you recall about that when the jury came back in? Did you know what? Did you have a feeling? We all try to guess it, but don't know.
The lawyers love it when the juries go out because they don't have anything else to do. And you can relax for a while. But then you get nervous after about 30 minutes. And they've been out about 4 or 5 hours. McDonald's getting ready to fly back to California and have their victory celebration on the Queen Mary. And Goodwin, the clerk, opens the door and says, we have a verdict. That's what she said, we have a verdict. The jury's coming back. So we all got up off the floor in the lobby. We walked back in. And I happened to walk back in next to McDonald. He didn't say anything to me, and neither did I to him. We sit there, they open the door for the jury to come in, and nobody comes through the door. It's like when she's introducing us here tonight, and nobody comes from behind the curtain. And you get a little more, what's going on? And finally, somebody walks through into the courtroom. Stumbles would be a better word. Crying. The second juror does the same thing. And after that, I honestly don't remember. But I remember thinking, good grief. I don't know that's not really what I said to myself. What I really said was something I shouldn't say. And
Not somebody from Wake Forest, anyway.
Well, there you go. And anyway, the foreman was Howard Trollman, which is a good sign for us. The only thing that I remember, they handed the jury verdict to Judge Dupree. He looks over at me and sort of half nods, but I have no idea what that means. That could mean I won, it could mean I lost. I have no idea what that means. And then, of course, the clerk reads him out, and she says, with respect to Colette MacDonald, how do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty in the charge of first degree? And she says, not guilty. And there's this big, it's like the wedding, the bride and the groom. The other side is all excited. How do you find the defendant with respect to murder in the second degree? guilty. He got 2 guilty verdicts in the second degree and 1 in the first degree of a little Kristen, a little girl. His mother was there. I don't know if Stephen King, who we were talking about earlier, could write a book that would have and describe a scream any louder and more awful than the scream his mother gave as they had to walk around the courtroom. And then in 30 minutes it was over. He got sentenced. They took him away. He went to Butner, the first night. And he eventually went to Atlanta, which was an awful place, and then to Texas. About a year later, the Fourth Circuit turns him loose on speedy trial grounds. He's free for about a year and a half. The U.S. Supreme Court reverses the Fourth Circuit, reinstates the conviction. And he's been in prison ever since. He'll be 80 years old this October. He was 36 when the trial took place. He is in Maryland in prison. He's in Maryland because he remarried while he was in prison, and his wife lives in Maryland. And the federal system is to put you close to any family that you may have. His mother, of course, has passed away.
Now, you told me today, I thought something interesting. Then we're going to move on to more about you outside of the trial. But I understand when the Fourth Circuit ruled that his speedy trial rights had been violated and he was allowed to be released, the judge wouldn't release it till you had come to some agreement with the defense or with the defendant?
Judge, the Fourth Circuit had ruled that he could get released, but Judge Dupree had to sign the order of release. I don't know why, but he had to. And Judge Dupree said, Jim, I'm not going to do that until you tell me I can do that. And I don't mean I can sit on it. It means I got to go through certain things like his passport and things like that. So Wade Smith called and he followed me around the office for about an hour or two, wanting me to do it. And I turned to Wade and I said, I'll do it as soon as Jeffrey MacDonald calls me on the telephone and talks to me. When he calls me and talks to me and I'm satisfied, I'll do whatever you want. And within an hour, at most, he called. We talked. It's very professional, very short, gracious, nice on both sides. I mentioned the passport issue to him. I didn't wish him good luck. He didn't ask me how I was. None of that kind of stuff. I did tell him to be careful and not do anything that's stupid,
Well, I don't want it to be lost that good lawyers are professional and ethical and zealous, but we do like to win. So what didn't hurt your feelings that you won the case, did it?
No, it hurt my feelings that he got free, and he eventually went back a year and a half later.
Okay, so you followed your pretty big cheese at that point, right? You've prosecuted Jeffrey MacDonald, and everybody thinks of you as this really fine young man and pretty good lawyer, right?
Yeah. The truth is, for a while, when you've won a case that big, and they've written a book, and they've done an NBC miniseries, and I'm portrayed in the miniseries. Although I must tell you, the guy who portrays me didn't go on, he did a Preparation Age commercial after that. He was a soldier in the North and South Book II, and was killed. Joe McGinnis one time called me and said, you remember the movie JFK? Well, whoever plays the DA, the actor who played me is his assistant. He is one of the worst actors in the world. Talks with him this god-awful Southern accent. That's the way you portray. But for a while, nevertheless, going back to your question, it was fun to be me. Yeah. I mean, that's true. Until it wasn't.
Jim told me today, I got to share this, and then I'll try to rein us in a little bit. Speaking of the TV movie, and the parents of Colette were instrumental, really, in keeping this whole case going. The actors that played her stepfather was Carl Malden.
Yes.
And Eva Marie Saint played the mother. And so tell us what you were so proud of when you saw
How many
that.
of y'all remember Eva Marie Saint? Raise your hand. You know, back in the day, she was really a well-known actress. I think she's still alive. A beautiful lady. Well, in one of the scenes, in the real life, Freddie and Mildred, the stepfather and mother, were concerned about my lack of experience. I understand that. And so it's portrayed in the movie that they're in bed together, Eva Marie Saint and Carl Malden. And they're talking about me. And they use my name. And the one who uses my name is Eva Marie Saint. How many of you all in this room have ever had an actress like that talk about you in bed?
Okay. There's the segue we were waiting on. So you'd been in the Justice Department, had the big win, and did you go into private practice at some period later?
Yes, I went. Every DA, every assistant DA, or every DA, when they leave, they think they're going to be hotshot criminal defense lawyers, which is sometimes true, sometimes not true. And so that's what I did. I tried to do that. So I went into private practice.
And where did what was it, a firm, or did you go out on your own?
Rick Gammon and I opened up a law practice in Raleigh for 2 or 3 years, and that went well.
Okay.
And I was solo for about a year. And then I joined a large law firm with offices in Greensboro, Charlotte, and Raleigh. I was in the Raleigh office.
And as we all know that have read the intro to this evening's discussion, some point you just were having some personal problems, would you say?
Yeah.
What was that about?
Well, at some point in my career, which should have been shining, I lost track, I guess, of what made me succeed in the first place. And either through hubris or slackness or the inability to say no, the belief that I could teach horses to fly, I did believe that. I still have trouble with that. That I got behind on I took too many cases particularly ones that I should not have taken, things that I really didn't know how to do. And the cases I got in trouble with were not the cases on which people pay me, they were the cases which people really didn't pay me. And got behind. And you know, the lesson that I learned, one of the things I talk about in my program, one of the lessons I learned, but I learned it the hard way, was that I made stuff up. I covered it up. I couldn't bring myself to say I hadn't done this, or I was wrong, or I lost, or something like that. So I just made stuff up, which is not smart. The crowning blow, you know, I never did real estate. I wouldn't know real estate law if it hit me in the face. But I do know about trust accounts. Anybody knows about trust accounts. Well, right after Thanksgiving in 1992, now mercifully a long time ago, and this client was driving me crazy, but I was driving them crazy too. He was probably justified in driving me crazy. And so finally, to pay him off from what he thought he was entitled, I had a friend he closed a loan on his house. He's an FBI agent. And so I went to the office the Friday after Thanksgiving, called the bank, BB&T, and wired $50,000 to this client. afternoon. I went out to help my mom buy a car. I was in a good mood because I thought I'd solved this problem, which I had.
Temporarily.
Until a few weeks later, when it all came tumbling down. And it went to hell quickly. The fact that I'd prosecuted MacDonald, or been well known, been in a movie and a book, didn't mean squat, as it should not. As it should not. I can still remember one of the lawyers asking me, "Did you do this, Jim? Did you have permission to send him that money?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I don't believe you." I said, "Well, let me close my eyes for 30 seconds. When I open them, I'll tell you the truth." And what you want to happen when you close your eyes like that, you want to die. I wanted to be vaporized, you know. And so I opened them, I told them the truth. And to my knowledge, since that day, I have done that completely ever since.
I think it's what you just described. You did not profit yourself from the money from the trust account.
No, but I did profit, I guess, not by money.
Getting them away.
Getting them away. I have to tell you this story. One of my former law partners came to one of my seminars years ago. He's sitting there. His name is Charles Bowman from Charlotte. He was telling everybody, I didn't know what he was going to say. He tells everybody else. He said, "You know, if Jim had walked down the hall and told us what was going on, this could have turned out differently. You wouldn't have as you may or may not know, I was in prison for 3 months. He said, you wouldn't have gone to prison." I looked at him and said, "What are you saying? You said all I had to do was walk down the hall and tell you the truth?" "Yeah." And I looked at him and said, "I would never have done that back then. I was too far gone in trying to keep this facade up of not making mistakes and all this sort of stuff."
Well,
And so I just want to say, it is a lack of courage that keeps people from doing sometimes what they ought to do. That's what happened to me.
I'm sure people that don't deal in the justice system, particularly courtroom settings, we have unique relationships with our opponents. We fight and we argue, but you learn a respect for them that it's hard to describe. So I know in my life, my law partner Glenn Barfield and Tim Haithcock here, when I had my problems, they came to my aid, but Brandy Vickery, elected DA at the time, and Matt Delbridge, who was assistant DA, they came to my assistance. When you kind of realized you were in trouble, who'd you go see?
Well, I called Wade Smith. I said, "Wade," he said, "What's up, JB?" I said, "Well, I'm in a little trouble. I just left my firm, probably for good." He said, "What's going on?" And then he, being the criminal defense lawyer he said, "Have you done anything criminal?" I said, "No." And that was not a lie. I was in denial, you know. And so he said, "I never will forget his second question. Are you getting ready to leave town with a blonde?" And I said, "No." He said, "Good, we can handle anything else." And we meet at a restaurant for a while. And he tells me he wants me to go see Dr. Gene Spalding. He's a well-known psychiatrist at Duke in Durham the next day. I said, "I'm not going to go see a psychiatrist." "Why not?" "I don't believe in it." "Well, yes, you're going to go." So he makes the appointment for me, which, of course, I cancel. That makes everybody mad. So the following Friday, my law firm says to me, "Jim, you're going to go see Gene Spalding, and your secretary's going to follow you in a car from Raleigh to Durham, which is 26 miles down Interstate 40, to go see the doctor." And that's how I go to see the doctor the first time. So I don't know how hard it is for you all to go to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a doctor, but I got you beat.
Well, and I've omitted somebody I'm looking right at, Miss Shelby Benton, who was also there for me during that period of time. But-
I think Shelby Benton came to one of my seminars one time.
Well,
I'm not sure. Even if you didn't, I'm going to say
Yeah,
you did.
there's,
Yeah, I think you did. I do remember that. And I want to say to Tim Haycock, who's here, Tim and I were in law school together. I went to a seminar in Nina Jackson's law office one time, and I can't remember the guy's name. He used to do this, he's from Goldsboro with the baking company, you know, but the bread company.
Franklin.
Yeah. So he sits there, Tim, one day, and says, you know, we had an illustrious law class. I always tell people this. We had Burley Mitchell, who goes to the Supreme Court, Chief Justice. We had the other lady who becomes the Chief Justice. And then we have Jim Blackburn. So go figure. He meant it.
Same conversation.
He meant it good. He didn't mean it bad. But anyway, that's the story.
So that you had excellent representation, but you had to face the music, so to speak.
I had Wade Smith and Rick Gammon. They never charged me 10 cents to represent me. And, you know, you're trying to say, I've got all these charges and stuff, you know. And the Friday night in July, when I learned I'm going to be indicted, Wade and Rick call me on the phone. They tell me what's coming, how bad it's going to be. And I don't know about you all, but being indicted is not what on top of my bucket list. And so I decided I'd just take a pass. So my idea was to go to Hilton Head that night and walk into the ocean and just drown. I go upstairs to the second floor to the bedroom, get my keys off the dresser. My daughter Stacy, who was 14 at the time, asked me where I'm going. And I said, well, I thought I might go for a drive. And she said, well, Dad, would you like me to go with you? I said, well, no, I don't think so. And she said, well, where are you going? I said, you must know I'm going to go to the beach. She said, and what do you think you're going to do when you get there? I said, well, I thought I might go for a swim. And she said to me, Dad, if you do that, I will never forgive you. I've forgiven you a lot, but I won't forgive you if you do that. I said, look, Stacy, they said we're going to be broke and poor and have to sell the house. This way we won't have to. What are you talking about? Well, I got life insurance to pay off. Dad, that is the stupidest thing I have ever heard in my life. It's a lot of money, Stacy. Money is not important. We love you. Don't do this. Money's just not important. Stacy, it's a lot of money. And she looks at me and she says, well, how much money are you talking about? And I said, well, it's $600,000. It was a term life insurance policy, you know. She said, oh, my God, I had no idea. Sit down, let's talk about it. I may change my mind. I want you to go after all. Well, what I want to say to you all is that humor and laughter are some of the best antidotes to bad news and tough times. I really do think that. Humor and laughter and unconditional love are really good. They'll work. That's what's good about a small town like this. That you know people. I bet a lot of you all know each other. Or if you don't, this is a good time to meet. But it's not how many friends you have, it's the quality of the friends you have. That's really important. You get that more in small towns. I don't know how large your law firm is, but I'll tell you something. If you have a law firm of 100, 150 lawyers or something like that, or even 50, Shelby, it's not the same as a law firm that's smaller. It's just not the same. That's where you should go.
So I know you've, in your podcasts and other remarks that you've done at your seminars, you did have to go to prison, and you were there for how long?
Well, I was sentenced to 3 years, but back then, gratefully, a year meant 1 month. I'm forever grateful for that.
This was a state conviction.
It was a state. And how that happened was, Wade wanted me to plead guilty to everything and not take a plea bargain agreement. You know, if you get a speeding ticket, you're going to try to get it reduced. And so I didn't want to do that. The DA didn't want to give me one. And so Wade says, I said, well, I had a friend who was an SBI agent who was on my side trying to help me out. And Wade gets up, he played football at Carolina. And he gets up out of his chair. He's denied this for years, but he did do this. He comes over and he hits me. Not hard, but sort of whacks me on the side of the head, you know. I said, why did you do that? He said, Jim, if you insist on asking for special treatment, you're not going to ever get well. So I said, what are you saying? He said, well, I'm saying to you that you need to take it. You need to suck it up and just take it. And you need to plead guilty to everything. And if you do that, you'll get your life back. You think so? I didn't believe him. It took me a long time. He said, what I want you to do tonight is I want you to go home and I want you to read the Sermon on the Mount. So I say to him, where is it? He said, it's in the Bible. I said, wait, I know it's in the Bible. He says, the 5th chapter of Matthew. Go home and read it. So I go home and read it. I think I'm the only client who's ever been told to go read the Sermon on the Mount. So I go home and read it. I come back. It's a long piece of work, you know? And after about verses 3 or 4, you can't do any of these things anymore, you know? And so I come back and see him a few days later, and he says, what'd you think? I said, I don't understand why I read it. He just rolls his eyes in the back of his head. There's a verse in there, there's a sentence there, Jim, that says, if someone wants you to walk with them 1 mile, you should walk with them 2 miles. Someone wants you to walk with them 1 mile, you should walk with them 2 miles. I think you should do it, Jim. And so I did. That's what I did. I didn't know what was going to happen. I had no idea. The judge who sentenced me was from Henderson. I knew him, but had not tried any cases in front of him. He had a nickname. His nickname was Maximum Height, for giving people the longest sentences possible. He didn't do that to me. I later saw him, years later, in a restaurant in Raleigh, one Sunday at brunch. He looks over at me, he waves. And I got up from where I was sitting and walked over to talk to him. It's like a high school reunion. You know how everybody lies at high school reunions and says you look great and all this kind of stuff. So we did that with each other. We told each other how it was good to see each other and how much we thought of each other and we were doing great. And he gave me a half hug. The sentencing judge. So I go back, sit down. They said, who was that? I said, that's the judge who sentenced me to prison. I don't know what to make of that, except that's the full circle in my own legal situation, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. What I would say is that if you remember the television movie or series Burns and Allen? You remember Gracie Allen? Some of y'all, somebody raise your hand if you remember Gracie Allen. Oh, everybody remembers. And George Burns was the straight heir. He was the debonair husband. Well, in real life, Gracie gets sick and passes away. After the service, George goes back to home. He finds a note in a sealed envelope on a desk in the living room. He opens it, and it's from Gracie. I mean, he's just buried. George, do not put a period where God has only put a comma. I cannot tell you how many times I've used that phrase in my programs, and I suspect lawyers who represent defendants, people who represent people in domestic matters where people are breaking up. It's only a comma. It may be a heavy comma, but it's not a period. There is no such thing as the end of the world, unless, of course, it is the end of the world.
Well, when you got out of prison, you really didn't know what you were going to do, right?
There's not a lot of demand for ex-lawyers. I mean, would you hire an
So-
ex-lawyer? You wouldn't hire an ex-lawyer.
You were convicted and lost your law license. And remarkably, which I assume will be, not looking forward to reading your obituary, but your obituary will mention Jeffrey MacDonald and probably 42nd Street. So tell us how that played, how it was that a man of your high-flying credentials and you come out of prison and next thing you're working at 42nd Street.
Well, before I tell that, let me just share this story about the obituaries.
Dang.
A number of years ago, I was going to Starbucks in North Hills, and my phone rings, cell phone. And it's Wade. Jim, how are you? I'm good. It's about 8 o'clock in the morning. He says, why are you calling? Well, it's just been on the radio that Jim Blackburn, who's a lawyer in Raleigh, has just died. I said, well, it's not me. And there was another Jim Blackburn, who's a lawyer in Raleigh, who had died. I go back where I'm staying, and my neighbor comes out, and she says, Channel 5 was just here. Wanted to know where you were, and was there an ambulance here last night? I said, no, I think you went to Starbucks. And Warden Smith, you all, Tim, you know Warden Smith is a huge law firm. I used to tell David Ward all the time, you've got the most anal law firm I've ever seen in my life. But anyway, they're really big, they're really expensive, they're really good. Somebody put on their website where it lasted for 24 hours that I had died. And somebody wrote a note to the website talking about me. What it was like to have been, what a wonderful life I'd had. And somebody said I ought to read that. It's a strange thing to read what somebody writes about you, thinking you're dead and you're not.
A little bit of a gift.
It was nice, but I'm grateful that it was nice. But,
So
I go to 42nd Street.
Probably got about 5 minutes to shoot the 42nd Street, not the dance number.
I learned I was a host. I didn't get to stay a host long because I was taking this couple to the table one night. And I asked the lady when her baby was due. And she told me she wasn't pregnant. And rather than apologize, I said to her, well, no more hush puppies for you.
That ruined the hostess career.
Yeah, that was a hostess career for me.
So they said you decided to try your hand. I think you rethought that career, but then
I decided to wait tables. I don't know if any of y'all ever waited tables. It's one of the most stressful things you'll ever do in your life. Don't you agree? And so I did it for a long time. Met everybody I ever thought I'd meet. I met the good, the bad, the indifferent, all of life. It's one of the best experiences of my life. Because what it did was it made me see people and it allowed people to see me and to get over the fears of seeing people, and to know how I'd be accepted or how I could handle something like that. You learn humility really fast when you're going to survive on tips. You learn to be nice to people you don't really want to be nice to, but you do the best you can. And
that had to be tough. A lot of people used to go to 42nd Street with to eat, where now you were waiting their tables.
Do we have 2 minutes left?
Yes, sir.
Let me tell you this story in 2 minutes. So I'm in New Bern telling this story about, there was a baseball movie, For the Love of the Game, starring Kevin Costner and Kelly Preston. And at the beginning of the movie, he's a baseball pitcher for the Tigers. He sees Kelly Preston's car is in trouble. He helps her. They go to a bar to have a glass of wine. And she writes the word yes and puts it on a sheet of paper over her head. And the next thing they know, they're in bed together. She asked him for the pencil and piece of paper. So I'm telling this couple the oyster bowl one night. They look like they're on a first date. And the lady, after I got through, turns to me and says, have you got a pencil and a piece of paper? So I'm telling this in Newbern, the story. The lawyer in Newbern says, my girlfriend wrote that scene. She's a playwright. She's a screenwriter in California. And she wrote the screenplay for The Love of the Game. So about 2 months ago, I meet her and have dinner with her and her boyfriend. And she was one of my third or fourth podcasts on Grit Stories of Resilience. She talks about writing screens. She's writing one now on Carly Simon. And so, of course, the question I asked on your behalf was, did she tell you who she's talking about when she writes the song, You're So Vain? And she says, no, she wouldn't tell me, but she did say every verse was about somebody different. But you never know who you're going to meet sometimes. So that's how that podcast came to be.
So, through the years, when did you wrap up at 42nd Street? Or can I get a table tonight?
No, but I will. No, it's a number of years ago, but I will tell you. One Saturday night, I'm there, and Brad Hurley, who owned it, comes to me and says, "Jim, we've got a problem." I said, "What?" It was somebody your parole officer's on the phone, and she says it's an emergency. She needs to speak to you. So I go down. Her name was Rose. So I go, Rose, what's going on? Well, Jim, we have a problem. I said, what? Well, some girlfriends and I are out front, and there's a long line. There's a long wait. It's over an hour. Can you get us a table? That's all you want? It's a table. I said, yes, I can give you that. I said, come in, don't go to the line, don't put your name down, just come over and we'll take you. So even parole officers need a favor now and then. So.
Well, I can say, following your story before I met you, and certainly since I've met you, you've been the epitome of dignity throughout this whole process. I know it was a tough time in your life. You've done it with grace, I know with faith. You wrote a book that, if any of you are interested after our presentation, Flame Out, that Jim would be happy to autograph a copy. And you've done continuing legal education to help lawyers throughout the country, but particularly your home in North Carolina. What has that meant to you to be able to use this hurt that you went through to try to help other folks?
It isn't that I won't just help lawyers or paralegals. That's fine, good.
Sure.
I do that. That's not my real goal has always been to take what happened to me and to share it with other people in the hopes that you would learn something or see something of yourself in some of parts of my story. I was making a talk one time, this is a long time ago, and right in front of it, this person started crying. And I was telling Rick Gammon later, I said, I must be a really good speaker. She was really crying. He said, Jim, you're so stupid. He said, she's not crying because of something you said. She's crying because of something, or because of you. She's crying because you said something that reminds her of something in her own life. And I don't know whether that's true of anything I said tonight, but the inability to say no is something that a lot of people can relate to. And so I would hope that something I said might be helpful to you. But if it's good, then this is a success tonight for me.
Well, it has been for me too. You shared with me earlier that someone said they could have made your book Flame Out a bestseller, made millions of dollars. What did you tell me what their title would have been?
Well, this is going to end it on I'll clean it up as best I can. Frank Daniels, who passed away, used to be the editor and the owner of the News and Observer in Raleigh, crusty old guy, takes me to breakfast one day in Raleigh. And he says, Jim, you know, your book, Flame Out's pretty good. It's a good title. I liked it. I read it. I don't know how you did, but I could have made you $1 million. How could you have done that, Frank? Well, I would have changed the title. What would you have called it, Frank? How to Come Back When You're Really Effed Up.
Well, you came back, and we're glad you did. Let's give Jim Blackburn a hand.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. I've enjoyed it.
We got time for a few questions. If anybody'd like to, we have a microphone.
We're going to forgo questions, but if you would like to get a copy of the book.
Okay.
Sorry, Jeff.
Sorry.
That comes from the top. We have copies available over on your right-hand side, right out front on the table. Listen, Jim, thank you so much for the courage to come and tell us your story. We're most appreciative. Jeff, as always, thank you for your great work. Next week, Max Orr, one of our favorites, is going to be here. Same bat time, same bat place, right here at Wayne Community College. I know you want to be here for that. One more time for Jim and for Jeff.
So we'll see you outside if you'd like to speak to Jim.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.